Hello, good evening, and welcome to another Let's Talk Life and Legacy, a moment with Dr. Grace. You know, it's always a pleasure to have you here, and it is our esteemed honor to be sharing with you this afternoon. And one of the things that you should realize is that by popular demand, you have drafted us back into this concept of roast breadfruit psychosis, post-traumatic stress, slave syndrome, and anarchism. What is this thing about? What are these about? How are they developed? How are they manifested? And where on the earth did we lose our identity? And how can we regain such? So welcome again this afternoon to Let's Talk Life and Legacy, a moment with Dr. Grace. And here with me are my co-host, Dr. Pernell Bell and Shauna K. Pottinger, who will be joining us to say hello, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Let's Talk Life and Legacy. We're ready to talk life and legacy about roast breadfruit psychosis.
I was just joining great ladies.
So what has been on your mind since we last met, ladies?
I've been thinking about the
beauty before age, Dr. Bell. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, so I was thinking about the pandemic and how the pandemic continues to rage, and how we need to be vigilant, and to continue to be vigilant, to continue to kind of avoid this anarchism and obey the restrictions, and just let us, capture this thing and put it where it belongs, out of the way, so we can exist and do what we do best.
Yeah, much like Dr. Bell, I have been doing my best to try. Are you guys getting the feedback, or am I the only person hearing that?
We are hearing it.
Okay, not sure what's going on there.
All right. While you're getting that sorted out, let's just welcome our listeners or constant supporters who are here with us on Facebook and on our YouTube channel Facing Life. We also invite you to share the link to ensure that many more persons are able to have this opportunity to interact with this interesting topic. Again, I want you to know also that we have two very important guests who are here to share with us, and they will be brought in a little while from now. So stay tuned and let's see what's happening here with Shauna.
Yeah, so much like Dr. Bell, as I was saying, I've been staying out of COVID's way, minding my own business at home, trying to make sure that I stay sane. As far as I know, every one of my children have their 10 toes, their 10 fingers. Everybody's alive. Nobody's in jail, praise God. So just giving thanks. COVID really has done us a number as far as forcing us into a space where we're learning more about each other, and that learning process, it takes on a whole new set of challenges. Before they spent a lot of time at school and so on. So my girls and I in particular, we're learning each other a little bit better these days because of COVID, and we're trying to work through that dynamic. As I said, everybody has their 10 toes and 10 fingers. So
and you counted them just before you came on, right? Yes. I hope so. Anyway, I'm noticing that each of you have a friend.
Shauna K, you're grateful, eh?
Yes, I am. I am.
Thankful and grateful. I noticed that each of you have a little browning look this evening, and I'm wondering if it has anything to do with this roast breadfruit psychosis that we are going to talk about. Something about your facial makeup or whatever you've done. It has a little difference. Dr. Bell, tell us again, can you help our listening audience to have an appreciation for what this roast breadfruit psychosis is? The last time we were here, they felt that they needed to learn some more and go more in depth with these concepts. Tell us, what is this thing called rose breadfruit psychosis, narcissism, and post-traumatic slave disorder.
Okay, so beginning with that roast breadfruit psychosis, it it was a term developed by Franz Fanon, who is a Martinican, and when he came back from the UK to Martinique, what he saw was this phenomenon in his mind where Black people were seeming to act white. And so he wanted to, he coined the term roast breadfruit from the fruit actually that had its origin in slavery, the breadfruit that we well know. So when roasted, that fruit is black on the outside and white on the inside. So he used that term to mean individuals, Black people, who are striving to be white. And it's interesting because one writer, Morris, actually said that it is that little Black girl who aspires to have a blue eye like a white little girl. So that in a nutshell is a striving to be, you're Black, you cannot maybe change your skin complexion, but you want to act like. Again, as we move on, we will see how this developed and how it has manifested itself in this society. And when we think of Anansiism, again, Anansiism was born out of slavery. This was a folklore about Brother Anansi, who actually is a spider. And this spider, Jinal, work his way, manipulate Brother Tiger, Brother Lion, and all these huge figures. But it was a representation of how Black people would tell these stories to again reclaim their identity and to feel a sense of power because they were subjugated and feel less than. So to be a spider, to outsmart lion and tiger was a way of reclaiming some sense of dignity and pride about themselves. But this Brother Nancy did this out of trickery, generalship, and a number of dishonest acts. He's a character who you love and then you can also hate.
Yeah, so while it was meant for good, it turned out in some ways for otherwise.
Yeah, it sort of seemed to me like as I reflect on what the Anansiism and the generalship thing is, it's almost like it's a two-edged sword in that there is so much wisdom and planning that and intentionality that has to go into the whole action of generalship. There's a lot of planning and genius, a lot of wits has to go into it. But what we're seeing is that with that creativity and the negative side of it, it's eating our country at its core because it's like it's working. It's like an how they say the antibodies or the immune system is there to protect us from certain viruses and infections. It's there to protect our organs and so on. But God help us if that immune system turns on the body itself. And I think that is what Anansiism has done to our country as far as it helped us where slavery was concerned in terms of providing with us for us an outlet and a space for us to feel some amount of autonomy and control. But what we're seeing is that as a result of the fact that it also has some negative razors attached to it, our society is now feeling and dealing and grappling with the very negative impact of this. And I don't know I really am hoping that the experts this evening will be able to help us to see our way through in terms of how we will be able to navigate ourselves out of this.
Yes, I am looking forward to that other level of conversation, especially from a theological, biblical standpoint. I just want to ask, though, or to look at the other aspect where we have the post-traumatic slave syndrome issue. Dr. Bell, I've studied counseling, psychology, and into this whole realm. And I've heard about this post-traumatic stress disorder. But and now we are talking about a post-traumatic slave syndrome. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So as it turns out, Dr. Bell got bumped for some reason. I'm not sure what's going on. I'm going to have to see if I could get in touch with her to see what's going on with her.
All right. While she's coming back, can we bring in Dr. Hannah a little early so that we can have him speak to this other aspect while we are getting back, Dr. Bell?
Sure, no problem.
Yes, in terms of Dr. Hannah, we appreciate your flexibility and your willingness to be here with us this afternoon as a theologian. I just want you to take a few seconds, just tell us a little bit more about who you are so that the audience can have an appreciation of your background. And then I'd love for you to respond to the question of where on earth did we lose our identity because we were born, created after God's image.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Grace. It's wonderful to be with you on your program this evening. I am from the Caribbean, having been born in the Bahamas, and I've also spent many years on the island of Jamaica. In fact, many, many years ago, when my parents were students in Mandeville, I was a toddler running around the campus there. And then I did my first degree at West Indies College, which is now called Northern Caribbean University. And after that, a few years passed, and then I came back and spent 10 years teaching there in Mandeville in Jamaica. So Jamaica is my second home, and now I live in the United States. So this is an interesting part of my identity. Bahamian boy, educated in Jamaica, professional career began in Jamaica, and now surviving here in the United States of America. And through this whole process, it has been important to me to maintain my Caribbean roots and my Caribbean identity. We were talking a while ago about this roast breadfruit syndrome, black on the outside, white on the inside. And I think the problem is not when we learn something good from another culture. That's fine. The problem is when we don't think that there's anything good in our own culture, so that we think we have to turn our back on our own culture in order to get the pure good from some other culture. And we need to remember that there is value in all cultures, and our Caribbean culture has great value in it. The fact that we went through the post-traumatic stress syndrome of slavery doesn't change the fact that we're a valuable people. We have a lot to contribute. I'd just like to share one Bible text on that as we get going here tonight. It's found in Acts chapter 17, and you all will be familiar with this text. It says, God has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and he has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings so that they should seek the Lord. In other words, you don't have to go to America to seek the Lord. You can find him in Jamaica. You can find him in the Bahamas. God is the God of all the earth, and he's the God of the Caribbean as well. And the text ends by saying he's not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. So the problem is not recognizing the good in another culture. We can copy the good from another culture. The problem is when we don't see any good in our own culture. And then I think that's what gets us messed up with this roast breadfruit psychosis.
In the good in our own culture and in ourselves, because it is suggested that about 95% of people, they live through other people's eye. They do not live the life that they desire. They do not live for a purpose that they were born. They live basically trying to find other people's identity. Welcome, Speaking Grace TV. It's good to see you both. Thank you for joining us. So, Dr. Bell, we go back to you, Dr. Bell, to continue on that level. Dr. Hannah, we really value that, because in God, what you say, we live and reign and have our being. So tell us a little bit more, Dr. Bell. How has these things manifested themselves, perhaps psychologically, socially, and attitudinally? How have they manifested themselves?
So if we are going to look, for example, at the post-traumatic stress, not post-traumatic stress, the
Slave.
the slave.
Post-traumatic slave syndrome. You see, you and I are conditioned, Dr. Bell. As a psychologist, you are conditioned. So it's even happening to us. Post-traumatic slave syndrome.
So for example, we're looking at that when I talked about the little brown girl in the ring. We are simply playing a game, but we cannot say the little black girl in the ring, because blackness, as I heard Dr. Hannah spoke a while ago, is as if we're not accepting self, because when we came to the Caribbean during slavery, we didn't come as people, we came as goods. And so that in and of itself robbed us of our identity. It manifests itself in the fact that we were our language, our sense of who we are was taken away. And so now when we describe ourselves, is that black and ugly. So blackness is synonymous with ugly. When we think about our face, the nose too broad, the mouth the lips too thick, and when we defined our facial features, it is something that is up to no good. And that again is because we were robbed of that level of identity. We were renamed. So even now our African names were not actually fostered. We were renamed, and all of that stripped us of our identity, so that we felt like blackness was not good enough. And so this is how our God-given features were now taken to mean something else, and it is manifested in self. It's kind of a self-hate for our Africanness that emerged, not just individually, but a whole nation of people dissociating themselves from their blackness as if ashamed of their identity. So, and it has manifested itself in how we see ourselves. Even today, we still have manifestation of that whiteness.
Right. Is it any wonder then, if I hear where you're going, is it any wonder that the hair industry has become a multi-billion-dollar industry, because those who have the kinky want to go straight, and those who have the straight want to go kinky? Is that something we could explore?
Absolutely. And remember, we also talked about the bleaching. So the bleaching, which would be we are moving towards a lighter kind of skin color, because again, whiteness was what was desired. And so the hair, the nose, the straight nose, the thin lips, all of those are Eurocentric features that Black people are striving for, because that in their mind is the very definition of what beauty is. And that hair, the long hair, we have kinky hair, which is our God-given quality that we have been given, and yet we do not like that. So that hair is also part of the manifestation of what we think beauty is.
And what's interesting here is that we identify beauty with those who have power. So the slave master had power over us, and therefore he must be righteous, he must be beautiful, she must be beautiful.
Yes.
So we forget that we also were intended by God to be kings and queens. You know, if you read the Old Testament, God's ideal for the nation of Israel would be that there would be a kingdom of priests and a kingdom of kings. But even within that culture, they fell into slavery, and their kings ruled over them unjustly. And then this led to them being unjustly ruled over by Babylonians and other nations. And so it's very tragic that we take the expressions of those who have abused us and dominated us and make them the standard of what is beautiful and what is cultural and what is civilized, when they're using that culture to dominate us and abuse us and take away our value. It's quite a psychosis.
So Dr. Anna, it is like a misguided view of self, and then we have embraced this misguided view of ourselves, and that's one way we can begin to reclaim our identity, that we are made in God's image and he made all of us. And so one race isn't made to dominate over the other. That was a misguided view emerging from slavery.
Yeah. And you know how the tradition has gone. We have interpreted scripture or misinterpreted scripture to say that because the black race or the ancestors of the black race were more evil, that's why they ended up being slaves. Instead of seeing it as injustice and sin, we saw it as a punishment for our sin. But the reality is that all human beings have fallen into sin. One race is not more sinful than another. We have all fallen into sin, and there is a solution to the sin problem through the plan of salvation centered in Jesus Christ. But again, because of our syndrome and trauma through slavery, some people turn their back on this great salvation because they identify it as the white man's religion. So that becomes another part of the problem.
View, you know? Misguided, and we have to understand it from that context, that it is just a misguided belief system that got perpetrated in a historical generational manner that becomes so indelibly etched in our history that it becomes very hard to erase. Even today, it is so ingrained. I'd like to make a comment too, that coming from a psychological perspective, one of the things that Dr. Frederick Icklin saw in this roast breadfruit psychosis was that many persons, Caribbean people who migrated to the UK, were actually experiencing psychotic features. And it is said this was born out of the fact, the same kind of whiteness and a striving for that you're not going to be attaining because you're not white. So it's an illusion. It becomes a psychosis because it's an hallucination to say that you are striving to be what you cannot become. And so many persons in the UK began to manifest schizophrenia as a result of this kind of a roast breadfruit psychosis or syndrome, if you may.
Now, I would like to know if that's like a natural result that will emanate from this kind of an identity crisis, if you will. What are the psychological impacts that kind of, if I'm experiencing that, what are some of the psychological impacts that I can anticipate that I will face as a person in terms of my overall personal development? I'd love to hear what are some of the impact that we could look to for when it comes down to roast breadfruit psychosis, Dr. Bell.
So we're going to think about self-hate of a nation. so that we're going to end up with self-esteem issues. We're going to end up with a dissociation from even our race. And so even now, we always hear about this crab in the barrel syndrome, where somehow we have learned how to keep our own people down because we ourselves are not feeling good about self, and it becomes a national, it becomes a nation that is manifesting features like these that create that psychological play for a people. So it self-esteem, it's a dissociation from self, and it's also a dissociation from our own race. It is self-hate that's going to come out, and all of those things are negative. And so it's going to manifest itself in our social and occupational functioning. We're not going to be functioning at our optimum with these deficits that we come from as a nation.
I appreciate that point, those points that were made. And what we find also, Dr. Bell, is that for some persons who are having these psychological reaction or issues based on these situations, sometimes they really don't know who they are. They don't know who they are. They don't know how to behave. They don't know what to aspire for because they are not having the expectation that they can become self-fulfilled. And sometimes outside of them being a parent, a friend, sibling, they are just playing a role, as it were, but they are not being their true self and while I have to be very careful, and I say careful because I don't want to offend anyone, but the bleaching and the dyeing of the skin and all of those things that happen, sometimes you see some people covered with tattoo in such a way that you don't know them different from the color of the ink. I am wondering, could that be as a result of some of these challenges, or is it some person's concept of beauty that they are cherishing? And yeah,
we have to remember though, sorry, Shanake, go ahead.
Yeah, I would want us to sort of also be sensitive to some of the cultural elements that play into some of the practices that people do, especially in relation to their bodies. And so I think that in terms of approaching this conversation, we still have to stick to the fact that, and I appreciate what Dr. Hannah said, is that when you're adapting or you're assimilating or you're becoming imbued with other cultures, you have to make sure that the things that you're adapting are also in line with what God wants for you in terms of your body. Are you causing harm? Are you inflicting some kind of wound? Are you taking care of his temple? And it is within that context that we're addressing the conversation today, though we are quite aware of the fact that some of these activities and actions are quite normal in some cultures, and we are respectful of that. We still believe that in terms of assimilating, we should try as best as possible to stick to what the Word of God says.
I appreciate that response. And that's one of the reasons we have, and another reason that we have beauty specialists with us, who we'll be bringing on shortly. Because people need to know how to maintain their beauty without having to change who they are in totality, and how the beauty can be from inside out, while we do take care of the external. Just want to say to our audience, those of you who are there, just let us know where you're from. Thanks, Trisha. See that you're here. And we have Janae,
that's my granddaughter.
That's your granddaughter. Okay, welcome. Just tell us where you're from, and remember to start putting your questions and your comments in the chat, because in short order we'll be moving to the speak up segment, and we really value your comments. And especially because it's by popular demand, you requested that we continue this conversation. Back to you, Dr. Bell and Dr. Hannah. tell us a little bit more about how do we now approach the reclaiming of our identity?
Yeah, you mentioned something very interesting there, Dr. Grace, when you talked about people who have forgotten who they are, who have lost touch with who they are. So they're just going through the motions of life, but they've lost their identity. And I think one of the keys for us to reclaim our identity is to realize that we can't move forward by cutting the cord to our history. My history is part of who I am. And I have to reconcile myself to my history in order to move forward into the future. And if my history is the history of a Caribbean man, that will always be my history. So who I am is not limited to who I am now. Who I am has to do with my ancestry. Who I am has to do with my past experiences, including my traumatic experiences. So we have to come to terms with those traumas. We have to process those traumas in order to move forward. And sometimes I think we lose our identity and we lose the opportunity for healing because we don't want to deal with the fact that we've been through traumas. We say, that doesn't have anything to me. I was not a slave during those days. But slavery has an impact on us today because it's part of our ancestral history. It's part of what forms the culture in which we live as Caribbean people. And so our entire community and culture is already twisted out of shape by that history. And it's part of our history, and we have to come to grips with it. We have to study it. We have to understand it in order to reclaim our identity. And that's why this program that you're putting on is such a valuable contribution to the public.
Appreciate that.
So I agree with everything that Dr. Hannah just said. I'd just like to add that we first need to know who we are. And always remember that we were created Black with all the lovely features of Blackness. And we need to understand and recognize that as a people, we were brainwashed by misguided people who continue to this day to promote superiority as a race. And so we need to understand that is just being brainwashed, being misguided, and that we should, despite all these odds that were against us and the oppression, that we emerged, we defied the odds and rose above the oppression. And we want to shift, I think, from reliving the trauma of slavery. We don't want to relive it. So the last time we spoke about Black History Month as reliving the trauma, what we want to do is to tell our stories, and tell our stories in such a way of triumph, of successes, of overcoming the odds. And all of those are beautiful qualities that a race, a nation should want to embrace and hold on to. And that I think going forward that we need to name and shame the people who continue to be misguided in terms of racist ideologies in this 21st century, and let them know that it doesn't have any place here. And our level of consciousness as a people must be raised to the point that we do not allow this misguided perspective to continue to be part of who we are and who our identity is. Because again, I want to emphasize how misguided our description of who we are was given to us by the race that subjugated us.
Thank you. Greatly appreciated. Shauna, do you have another thought or comment?
No, I'm really getting excited because I can't wait for you to delve a little bit further into this Anansiism. Because, you know, one of the things that we were laughing about it, we made jest about this poem that we saw online where this guy pretending to read the news said something like, you know, Satan doesn't want Jamaicans in hell because they are coming on other people's death certificates. They're installing ACs and refrigerators, which is against the rules and the laws of hell. And I mean, it was just so funny, but we laugh about it, but I really want us to sort of deal with that issue in terms of how we are in and of ourselves creating some kind of self-harm, because we fought for independence so that we were able to self-govern. But when we have behaviors and norms and tendencies that are poisonous and toxic to our overall growth, how do we overcome that? How do we chart our course in terms of moving forward so that we can heal from that and then start towards, on a path of success, growth, and economic development? Because I'm sure most of us don't necessarily look at it as that. Some of us, we laugh about some of the scams that are going on right now. It's funny to us. And even children, they learn how to do this, engage in the same type of generalship behavior, and it's somewhat celebrated. I would love for us to sort of delve a little bit further in how this Anansiism, though helpful in some ways back then, is now hurting us, and how can we overcome that as a country?
This raises another issue that's very important. We touched it a little bit indirectly, and that is the systemic problems in the society. We not only have an identity problem as individuals, we have an identity problem as a community. And so there's a lot more we can do in the church and in the politics of the nations to provide opportunities for our people. And maybe we don't always do as much as we could. And that's a kind of a systemic problem that continues to contribute to the Anansiism, because there are people in the society who feel they don't have any choice but to do this in order to survive. And so we need to fix the structural inequities in the system to give all of our people, or many more of our people, as many opportunities as possible. Because as you were saying earlier, the same wisdom and wit that people use for Anansiism could make them a great prime minister, a great educator, or a great doctor. But they don't see that as an opportunity, because often we haven't presented to them that there is that opportunity. They don't see it around themselves, that this is a possibility for me. So that's a challenge for us as educators. It's a challenge for us as preachers. It's a challenge for the politicians among us, to be sure that we're doing what we can through these institutions, including the institution of the church, to build a vision for our youth so that they can see that they have other options available to them. And that's part of reclaiming the heritage as well.
Okay.
Reclaiming the identity.
While I know Dr. Bell will join and add, we want to thank you, Dr. Hannah, for what you have just shared. But I also want to go back in terms of the institution of the home, where we train the children from early. So you take a holistic approach, but the character development is very, very important, even as we seek to help them to appreciate beauty. The best thing for them is to appreciate character development. I read something where it says a teacher went into the class and said, I'm giving you 2 tests today. One is going to be about trigonometry, and the other one is going to be about integrity. And I hope that you will pass both. But if you were to pass only one, let it be the test of integrity. So if we were to teach our children that, we would get them to a place where they can appreciate themselves, respect for self and respect for others, so they don't carry out this Anansiism in our society.
Yeah, indeed. One of the things about identity is that it's not just individualism. Our identity is also about our relationships, and that starts in the home. That's where we learn how to have relationships with other people, how to have healthy relationships, or how to have unhealthy relationships, depending on the health of our homes. So we do need to recognize that this reclaiming of the identity is about relationships as well. And that's where the Anansiism becomes kind of toxic sometimes, because it's not really building relationships. It's about exploiting relationships, exploiting other people, rather than teamwork and collaboration and cooperation. It's then becomes generalship, and trickstery. Yeah.
Appreciate that. Dr. Bell, I know you will have something more to say, but I want to at this time bring on Melva. She has a lot to offer as it relates to not just the identity and the personal and facial beauty, but something I like, recently she did a program. It was called From Malden to Million. Sorry to throw you back into that space, Melva. But as we were talking about this anarchism and how people thrive to attain certain things without working for it, you have epitomizes that in your own life, from Amiga. I mean, tell us a little bit about that and how do we treat with this topic and also have an opportunity for internal, inside out beauty and excellence.
Okay. First off, let me say this is just an absolutely amazing platform that you all have. Dr. Bell, I now get the opportunity to say hi to you. Great to see you. And Shauna and Dr. Grace, what an incredible job that you are doing. Well, I want to say this. I love something that Dr. Hanna said before, and he says, we have to always understand where we're coming from in order for us to be able to ever appreciate where we're going, because we do stand on the shoulders of giants. And whether we came all back from slavery, we do stand on the shoulders of. Grace asked me to share in a minute what it was like to come from the beginnings that I had. I know exactly what it is to not have anything. I know exactly what it is to be able to go to school and you take the shoes off when the rain is falling to get home. So you truly don't mess up your shoes. Get the feet in the mud, but not the shoes, because it was the one. And I can appreciate that where I came from in order to be able to be where I am. In the essence of seeing each other, we grew up in scenarios where you heard the terminology so often. If you're Black, stand back. If you're brown, stick around. And if you're white, you're all right. And as kids, we heard that. We grew up, we went to high school, we heard it all the time. And even in the way you were employed in a Jamaican culture, we had that to work with. But it doesn't defy the very fact that deep inside our being, we must know, and Dr. Hanna, I think that Dr. Bell said that, we must always remember who we are. And not only who we are, but whose we are. In order to be able to fully express ourselves without losing ourselves in what we think others think should be, what others think we should look like, or what others think our nose should look like. I remember going to school and people would say, oh, big nose, big mouth. And I work in an environment where women come into the cosmetics industry and they're worried about a big nose or a big mouth. And as a result of that, the level of confidence they have, is shifted because the focus is on. And one of the things I love about what I do is the opportunity to be able to share with others that beauty really comes from you, the internal piece of who you are, what you contribute, the good that you can give to others. And you can find so much worth in what you give rather than what you look like, or literally what other people think you should look like.
Really appreciate that. Thank you so very much. I'm sure Shauna.
Powerful words.
Go ahead.
How is
I
that,
love
Dr.
it.
Bell?
Powerful words. Powerful.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Very powerful words.
Any question now for Melva? Any additional question for Melva?
Melva, I appreciate what you bring in terms of emphasizing inner beauty, right? And most of the times when a person is actually grappling with that kind of a confidence issue, right? It definitely has something to do with their environment, and a lot of it has to do with parents. I would love for you, I'm a parent of two beautiful girls, but on behalf of all the parents who have the responsibility and the duty of raising children, can you give us some tips on how we can inspire that level of confidence in our children for them to know and recognize who they are, and being able to hone that inner beauty so that they can grow from within.
I absolutely love the fact that you brought that up, because so oftentimes as parents, we tend to want, even as we're saying that people, I want you to identify with certain things, or kids want to be identified in their own identity and not ours.
Mm-hmm.
And so enhancing, sharing with them the things that they love about themselves and reinforcing that. I can recall, my son used to come, I'm working just at the time when how they come just at that time. And when I get into doing something, he'll come and say, I'd like to have this to eat. And I remember my husband said to him, I know you're the best chef in the whole world. You are so good. And I can tell you at his age, he'll go in that kitchen and prepare anything because he heard someone said to him, guess what? You're a Chef Boyardee. And it wasn't the case. But the little things that we can do to make the difference, enhancing things instead of focusing it on a negative aspect. Okay, you can go find something to eat now. Instead, using it in a positive way and say, you are a master chef. Us as parents, if we can find those little key areas, those are nooks and crannies where we can pull out and allow them to think a new thought in a place where it didn't necessarily wouldn't have been that way. But if we can just instill, and they literally sometimes will turn and look at you and say, you think I can be a good chef? Yeah, I know you can. And now I can get up in the morning and say, and here, do you want a sandwich or do you want a omelet? I mean, hello, he's reading books on, looking on, social media to find out how to cook something. This was the same child who would come every time and said, I need something to eat. Literally. So that is so crucial for us as parents to be able to bring out those little things. And then the other is the small deeds that they do that you can magnify. Like, I can get you you get me a cup of water. That is just so awesome. Rather than seeing it as something natural for you that you're expecting, and allow them to know that it's not only expected, that you honor the fact that they're able to do that. So those little things could make a huge difference.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. As it relates to the beauty side, in addition to what you've said, there are simple things that parents can do in letting the child know that they are very beautiful.
That's right.
Tell us one or two little tips.
Okay, I'm going to take it from my standpoint. As a child, my nose was big and my lips were big, and we heard that. Kids would call us by those names.
Hold on, you said they were. So have you done some
Nothing.
facial reconstruction?
Absolutely nothing. But your mind is a powerful thing to waste.
Exactly.
Really. How you see yourself, and one of the beauty of saying to your child when they go into a mirror, or when I go into a mirror, I remind myself that the Lord created absolutely no junk. Never did and never will. So every person is so uniquely formed, and there is no copy of Dr. Bell. There's not a copy of Shauna. There's not a copy of Dr. Grace. There's not a copy of Dr. Hannah. You're one of a kind, uniquely made, super special. And I remind myself of that every time I look in a mirror, every time. It doesn't matter if I have lines here, there, or everywhere. It doesn't matter. I am just absolutely beautiful. I don't know what you're thinking, but this is what I'm thinking. And I tell my kids that. I'll say to my son, you're handsome, you look fabulous. And he'll look at you, you think so? Which is affirming him at that moment that yes, it is. So we are as beautiful internally as we feel. And we must be reminded that God did not at any moment took his precious time to carve out anything but a significant, superior, powerful human being. We're one of a kind. No carbon copies. We don't need we don't need any of the above. We're just grateful that God has given us the power to be who we are and instill in us such beauty in every facet of our lives.
Amen.
And
Wonderful.
remember too that definition of beauty comes from sometimes misguided views. And so we shouldn't allow ourselves to be misguided into what's beautiful. Our beauty should be carved out into the fact that we are wonderfully and fearfully made. All of us.
Beautiful.
And I'm showing off my
Absolutely.
beauty.
Absolutely.
And don't go by anybody's definition of what beauty is.
That's right.
All right. Thank you so very much. So you're listening to Let's Talk Life and Legacy, a moment with Dr. Grace. And this afternoon, we have some fabulous individuals with us. And we are ready for your questions and your comments. So please share them at this time so that these experts can provide you some expert responses. In the meantime, while we are waiting on them, Dr. Hannah, is there anything else that you would have thought about and want to ensure that we share with our audience? And just remember that even though the attendance may be affected because of change of time in some areas, persons do go and rewatch the YouTube. So we are catering for them in that context also.
Yes, I love Melva's point about God doesn't make any junk. I think that's very important. And as she was waxing eloquent about that, I was thinking theology in terms of the image of God. God created us in his image. And when he created man in his image, men and women in his image, it wasn't a white man he created, you know, it was humanity, the human race, and built into that wonderful, perfect humanity that God originally created. Built into
Diversity.
it was the potential for all this diversity. That's it. All this diversity came out of that original creation. So I go back again to my first text that I shared earlier today from Acts 17. God has made all the races of one blood. We're all the human race. Therefore, we're all in the image of God. If you have only the white but no black, you don't have the whole image. If you have only the man but no woman, men but no women, no image. We need the whole spectrum. Red and yellow, black and white, male and female, they're all created in the image of God. So to appreciate the diversity and the uniqueness of each individual's beauty is such an important point, and it is rooted in biblical theology.
And I appreciate that. And I just want to give a shout out to Hannah and a friend from Speaking Grace TV. They are actually from Africa, but they are living in UK. And they are two wonderful young ladies who are doing a phenomenal job with working with individuals. One of them is a fashion designer, and they work with persons so that, you know, they can bring out the inner beauty. I just want to celebrate them. They may not have stayed, but I know they were on because they are like 5 hours ahead. But I want to at least appreciate them for sharing in our conversation this afternoon just by being present. Thanks also to all the others who are here with us. I'm not seeing any questions coming in, so panelists, you're on again. May I ask Melva any other points you'd like to share, especially for teenagers who may be going through some identity issues? What other thing that you could share for them?
As you probably all know, I'm with Mary Kay Cosmetics as an independent consultant with Mary Kay, and we do come across so many women on a whole, and a teenager at this specific time in their lives, as it relates to beauty, they are totally cognizant of everything based on my experience, and everything they have to be affirmed in so many different areas because of peer circles and what the others construe that Dr. Bell talked about, that Dr. Anna talked about as what is being beautiful. And then what their idea of what beauty looks like. So coming into an environment where I am, we find it necessary to remind them to affirm themselves. And I take pride in consistently reminding how beautiful they are, and that the internal piece of who you are really truly brings out the best of who you are. And when you have gratitude, that's another key piece of what brings beauty. When you learn to forget about the you part and extend yourself with giving gratitude for everything and lending a hand across to another person, then we tend to leave the issues, the little things that gnaws us behind to be able to focus on a bigger picture. So as much as we can understand what our purpose is on a whole, we're better able to facilitate everything else that comes around us.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I see the nods from Dr. Hannah. Is it that you have something else you want to just share with us?
Yeah, I think this resonates also with the issue that was being discussed earlier about parents modeling for their children what true beauty is and encouraging their children. And another aspect of that is that as parents, we must believe that we're beautiful if we're going to expect our children to believe that they are beautiful, because they will sense in us the self-hate and they will catch it from us just like you catch COVID. So we have to make sure that we have our self-image straight. If mother and father have a negative self-image, it passes on to the children. So it's very important what you were talking about, Melva. You help your children by thinking positively about your own beauty. And they sense from you that self-confidence and that self-beauty. And then it rubs off on them. And the same thing happens for all the rest of us, whether we be pastors or teachers or professionals in other areas.
Yes.
Each of our successes is an object lesson for somebody else looking on to say, if he could do it, I could do it too. He's from the Caribbean just like me, and he's a success. I could be a success too.
That's right.
So self-development is not only for yourself, it's also for the others around you who will have the courage to walk in your footsteps.
So it means, therefore, parents can't just throw words at their children and say you're ugly like, or you're... Because if you do that, you're instilling them an image of who they are, and they will go thinking that's all.
And it has to do more than just with physical self-image as well. It has to do with character issues. I like the idea Melva was emphasizing about praising what is good. We need to spend more time praising what they do right than complaining about what they do wrong. If all they hear about it from us as parents and as teachers and as administrators, if all they hear is what's wrong with them, then they begin to believe that everything about them is wrong. So we need to spend more time telling our young people and our students and our children what's right about them, and then mix in, if necessary, a little correction here and there.
Yes.
But most of the comments need to be positive.
Thank you. Shauna?
We do have a question here, and I happen to know who Jacinth Haldane is, so I know why she's asking this question. She is actually an educational administrator, and she's interested to know from our guest this evening, what can you do to assist a child whose self-esteem is so damaged that it is even affecting their academic abilities? I don't know which of our guests. I think Dr. Bell may want to take a stab at that first, and then we'll hear from Dr. Hannah and Melva.
I'll tell you something. Just this week, I have had several young adults who are experiencing self-esteem issues. And one of the things that I have come to recognize is that we have an inner critic, and an inner critic that is based on societal, again, definition of what is beauty, definition of what we should be. And so we have to learn how, one, to teach our children to silence that inner critic, put a silence on that inner critic. We also have to teach our children how to reassess their relationship with praise. Because and I heard what was said earlier, but I'm just going to kind of put what I said into context. So if everything we're looking for validation from others and praise from others, then we could become kind of addictive to wanting that kind of a validation. We need to learn how to validate ourselves. And that validation of self, then we won't have to always be looking for praise and the end product. Another thing too is that many times that inner critic is born out of fear and irrationality. So don't argue with that inner critic. silence the inner critic. And how do we do that? We silence the inner critic by challenging the truth, because usually that inner critic is an irrational person that we need to name to. Give it a name. Name it.
Mhm.
One young lady this week say, I'm going to name it Monster. So Monster, I don't want to hear you today. Shut up. Stop.
Mhm.
Stop. And so if we're able to understand that inner critic that is born out of societal pressure, then we can within ourselves build and empower ourselves without waiting for validation on the outside to be able to emerge as a strong, beautiful inner and outer person.
Wow.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Well said.
Thanks for emphasizing that and balancing that point out, Doc,
Mhm.
because that's so important, which means then that we have to fix some of our theology too, because sometimes it's our theology and our religion that tells us we're no good. You know, we so
Mhm.
emphasize the part of religion that says you're born in sin and shaped in iniquity,
Iniquity.
and we don't emphasize enough the part of religion that says you're created in the image of God and God loves you,
Yes.
and we are fearfully and wonderfully made. So we need to really be balanced in our theology and in our understanding of Scripture. Beautiful.
You know, it's
Mm.
interesting. I'm reading this book about emotional agility. I don't know if you guys have read it, but it's a very powerful book that speaks to the whole idea of us having certain innate and implicit drives or biases that causes us to um, overvalue or overemphasize the things that we know as good and undervalue new things. And I think part of what Dr. Bell and Dr. Hannah just spoke to a while ago, those things are very new concepts for, I would say, for a child to even grasp as they're going through the motion of dealing with what I hear mommy say every day. And I'm coming to the school and I'm hearing the principal saying that you're smart or whatever. It's almost like there's a conflict going on. And that child now has to make a decision between this is what I know, and I need to deal with that, dispense of that, and take on
Silence it.
new phenomena. You know, it's and to me, I think that that's just so much. And as a parent, if we can save them that trouble
Mm.
and save them that trauma of having to try to deal with that, where they're faced with a serious identity crisis, where you're no good, you are dumb, you're stupid, you know, nobody with the right in their right minds would ever think of doing something like that. Instead of talking to them like that and start empowering, you know, we could save them all that trouble of giving the job to the school principal per se, you know, to shape them in terms of, you know, for them to become confident individuals or humans as they grow up. So that's a very important piece. And, you know, Dr. Bell, this is something that I've discussed with, you know, recently about the imposter syndrome. And that's something that even adults deal with, where you feel as if you're not really that good enough. And someday somebody's going to just peel the curtains back and just find you out. There's, you know, there's going to be this great discovery. And, you know, one of the things, I don't know if I'm wrong for thinking about that, but I really and truly believe that your inner critic, the very same inner critic that you use on yourself, you use it on other people as well.
You're on point. You're on point.
The very same effect that the Anansiism is having on our country is the very same effect that imposter syndrome is having on us as we turn and we start judging ourselves with some standards that are just unreasonable. I don't know if anybody else share those sentiments.
I think it lines up with you see things from where you are. So you reflect your feelings onto others. You reflect what you're feeling onto somebody else, regardless of whether or not that is what they're bringing to you. But you see it from where you stand.
Wow. Project.
Well, Dr. Bell is coming on. I know Shauna addressed that, but Roberta, our famous Supporter, she just said something about us wanting to, needing to address the imposter syndrome. And I think that is something that is very critical to be addressed, because you cannot rise above your own level of thinking. And you judge based on your past, based on your state of mind, your current state of mind. But Dr. Bella, I'll give you the last word on that, because you are the psychologist.
I would say that one of the things that is going to help us is even what we're doing here tonight, raising consciousness.
Yes.
And so once we're raising consciousness, what does consciousness tells us? It tells us that it's an imposter. Who is an imposter? Somebody who is actually showing up. So it's not you. Again, it goes back to what I said earlier. Once our consciousness is raised, when that imposter shows up, we want to silence them. We don't want to argue with them. Don't argue with your beauty. Don't argue with your achievement. Don't argue with that, because usually that inner critic is irrational. We don't argue with irrational people because we're not going to win. So that raising of our consciousness allows us to recognize these things, and then we don't waste time trying to prove to the imposter whatever. We don't waste time trying to argue with the fact that no, we don't. We silence that. And then what we learn to do is to recognize that whatever we are doing, mistakes are wonderful opportunities for us to learn. So look at what these are and correct them and move on. Don't beat up on ourselves. So we can correct stuff. If we look and we are looking in that mirror and the mirror says, yeah, this is what this is, rather than beat up on ourselves, just recognize that mistakes are wonderful opportunities for us to learn.
Yes, and we also need to develop a healthy spirituality, an awareness that God is with us. In spite of our weaknesses, in spite of our sin, God is with us. You can't escape him. He's omnipresent. He's with us. If we recognize this, then we will not measure ourselves by, our past interpretations of what we could accomplish. We'll measure ourselves by what God might be able to do with us. I often say to my students that God can cut down a forest of trees with a plastic knife, because he's God. So don't worry about me being a plastic knife. I'm in the hand of God. And he'll cut down a whole forest with a plastic knife. So healthy spirituality, not just traditional religion, but healthy personal spirituality. Confidence that God has not cast us off. Our weaknesses have not disqualified us from being loved by God. That can be a very, very empowering understanding.
That's so powerful.
Appreciate that. Wow, what an evening. I hope that our audience would be very pleased that we would have covered these three mind-boggling concepts: breadfruit psychosis, anarchism, and the post-traumatic slave syndrome. So at this time, we are going to give each person an opportunity for your 30 seconds final word to our listeners. What would be your takeaway, or what would you want them to take away from this exciting conversation this afternoon?
I wanted to say that our definition of our Blackness, of who we are, were perpetuated by misguided people, and we should not continue in this 21st century in being misguided into a definition of who we are. We need to raise our consciousness and just soar to the heights that God wants us to go.
Wow.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm gonna go next. This conversation has been rather enlightening. I really appreciate the layers and the different perspectives that were offered from the theological and psychological aspects. One of the things I've often said is that Satan has succeeded at allowing us to create categories and group people into different segments. So we say male, female, and then there's always this battle going on among those groups. But one of the things that I am so grateful for is that when it comes on to Christianity and when it comes on to salvation, is that at the end of the day, we are not necessarily being discriminated against or chosen based on how we look, the color of our lips, the red, white, black, whether the size of our lips, the size of our nose. None of those factors will determine whether or not we can be saved and be brought into God's kingdom. I'm so happy that his culture celebrates unity, that in spite of how you look, feel, and no matter how you act, God wants to say to you, listen, I love you, come. And I'm just grateful for that, because I think that helps the discussion and the conversation when we talk about differences and embracing those differences. I'm happy that I serve a God that embraces the difference in me as he does everybody else around that wants to follow him. So that definitely is where I would leave this conversation.
Since Shauna was preaching, I'll go next. Yeah, there's a favorite text of mine in Colossians 2, verse 9, speaking about Jesus. It says, in him dwells the fullness of the Godhead bodily. And then the next verse says, and you are complete in him.
That's right.
So when we develop a healthy spirituality, we are completed by our relationship with God through Jesus Christ. You can't be all you can be by yourself. You need your parents, you need your village, your community, you need your teachers, but you also need God. And he is the greatest support that we can have. And when the fullness of the Godhead is made available to us through Jesus Christ, we can have completeness through a relationship with God. And this is not just about salvation in the hereafter, because some of us are so heavenly minded, we are no earthly good. When we really experience salvation, it transforms our lives in the here and now, and we become instruments of God's peace within our culture. We transform our Caribbean cultures, and we recover the strengths that God has placed in us because we have been redeemed, we have been saved. Salvation happens in the here and now while we wait for the kingdom to be established in the future.
Wow. Amen.
That is just incredible. Okay, what do you say after Dr. Bell, Shauna, and Dr. Hannah? That was a full cup, and I'm coming off of this call totally inspired and filled. I would love to say this, that we were all born for a special purpose, and we must realize that no matter where you are from, what color, what creed, where you live, any of that, you came here on purpose to be able to be a significant contributor on planet Earth. And as a result, always be reminded that you're never a blimp, you're truly a blessing to the face of this earth. And I want to remind you of this scripture that guides me all the time. Whatsoever things are good, whatsoever things are of good report, whatsoever things are lovely, think on those things. So when our mind transcends to something else, bring it back home, knowing that whatsoever things are lovely, think on those things. Thank you. Back over to you, Dr. Grace.
I appreciate this thoroughly. And I just want to say I just want to repeat something I said earlier to encapsulate everything here that has been said by these phenomenal persons who have contributed to a very educational, empowering conversation. And that is, today, you are given the opportunity to excel at whatever the Lord has put in you as your purpose. I hope that each of us, each of you, will embrace our identity in God. And as we reclaim our identity, remember, You're going, it's said what? Life is the only place that gives you the test before they teach the lessons. And you have 2 tests this afternoon. And one is a test of life, and the other is a test of life. How are you going to live your life so that you can leave a legacy? And if you're going to fail at any, as I said before, whether it be geometry or whatever, make sure that it's going to be that you will win with integrity, because that's a foundation all of us will need. And this is how we end. Let's talk life and legacy, a moment with Dr. Grace, where we have discussed the topic reclaiming our identity, overcoming breadfruit psychosis, Nazism, and post-traumatic slave syndrome. It has been our absolute pleasure and delight being here with you. Thanks to God, thanks to our panelists, and thanks to our engineer and all those who have assisted. Thanks for being here with us. And we say,
Ta-ta!
Bye-bye, right?
Bye bye.